Hello everyone, Angry Nerds. Today we're here for a new episode of Game Boy Madness, where I bring you a barrage of micro-reviews of Game Boy games that will make you laugh, cry, and probably scream at the screen. I'm here. Classics, there are horrors, and there's also stuff that should never have seen the light of day. Get ready, because in 30 seconds I'll explain why some of these titles are absolutely unplayable and others, well, not even Superman would save them.
Here's a game that has you digging rocks like a mad miner, only instead of gold, you find frustration. You have to collect gems while trying not to get crushed by falling rocks, but the controls make you feel like you're walking through mud. The collisions are absurd, and the precision? Stuff to laugh about. But hey, if you like being crushed to death, this is for you.
Gauntlet 2 on the Game Boy is like trying to watch an epic movie on a 2-inch screen. Enemies in pixels the size of a house and repetitive music that pierces your eardrums. You're fighting hordes of enemies, but there's not enough space on that screen to really have any fun. As frustrating as trying to make a coffee with oven mitts. Fortress of Fear? More than fear, it's pure anger. This is a platformer so stiff you feel like a dummy while jumping and attacking. Collisions are non-existent, and enemies hit you from every angle. It's one of those games that makes you wonder if it's worth living another crappy virtual life.
World Bowling is one of the few bowling games, and guess what? It still sucks. The idea is nice, but the physics of the ball seems like a nightmare. No matter how you throw it, the ball decides to do what it wants. Oh, and the graphics? Well, let's hope you're not here for the eyes. Imagine a cheesy version of Pac-Man, but with aliens that make you want to turn everything off. You have to trap them in the holes, but with those slow controls, you'll just get a fistful of rage. It's one of those games that feels like punishment more than fun.
A classic shoot 'em up, but boy, the difficulty is off the charts. Enemies fill your screen and hitboxes are as unfair as a surprise exam. But, hey, at least the music is decent, when you're not too busy screaming in anger at being blown up again. Nemesis is Konami's answer to Gradius on the Game Boy, but with a difficulty that will have you swearing for days. Power-ups are great, but if you die, you go back to being a pathetic tissue paper chaser. Frustration is inevitable.
Flippool is one of those puzzle games that I never thought existed, and now I understand why. The idea is to throw blocks at other blocks, but the graphics are so depressing and the gameplay so repetitive that it makes you feel seasick. Quarth, a mix between Tetris and a shooter? Yes, it sounds better than it is. You have to shoot blocks to complete them, but the pacing of the game is all out of balance. It becomes either too easy or too chaotic in a second.
Poor Penguin, his job is to roll an egg through a hellish maze. The egg physics are a mess and the enemies always make the worst moves at the right times. It drives you crazy quickly, and the repetitiveness wears you down. Serpent is an attempt to take Snake and make it more complicated, too bad they just messed it up. You have to eat blocks and turn them into snakes, but that gets boring quickly, and snake control is a mess.
A racing game so bad it will make you want to throw your Game Boy out the window. The graphics are confusing, the speed gives you a headache, and the controls are so stiff it makes you look like a drunk driver. Playing Popeye is like eating expired spinach. The taste is horrible and you feel sick after 2 minutes. The gameplay is slow and boring, and if you think Popeye is cool, wait until you see him in this game. He looks like a tired old man.
Mercenary Force is a mix between strategy and shooter, but man, how strange is it? You control a group of mercenaries, but the tactical choices are nil, and the difficulty hits you like a blow. It's chaotic, frustrating, and doesn't make any sense. Kicks is that game that makes you draw lines to conquer space, but it pisses you off like never before. Every time you think you're doing well, it all blows up in your face. It's one of those games that feels like a puzzle for sick minds. But I love it.
Gargoyle's Quest is one of those rare good games on the Game Boy, but it's as bad as any. The platforming is precise, but the difficulty of the enemies and obstacles will make you scream for revenge. A masochistic masterpiece. Cosmo Tank is a mix between adventure and first-person shooter, and it's more confusing than anything else. The idea is brilliant, but the gameplay is boring and the graphics suck. You never understand where to go or what to do.
Batman on Game Boy is anything but, well, Batman. No punching, just shooting and 2 ridiculous bosses. All season with a horizontal shooter section that seems to have been put there just to finish the torture, but since it was one of my first games for Game Boy, I love it even if objectively it has nothing to do with Batman. Volley fire is a cross between a shooter and Pong, but without the fun. You fire at the enemy on the other side of the screen, but the repetitiveness eats you alive. Nothing new happens, and it's more boring than watching paint dry.
Spider-Man, one of the greatest heroes, reduced to jumping around like an idiot on a Game Boy. The controls suck, the jumping is ridiculous, and the graphics are so pixelated that they give you a headache. Oh, and hitboxes are a nightmare. A Pac-Man clone, but with thieves and cops. Sound fun? It's not. The controls are slow, the levels frustrating, and the difficulty unbalanced. It's like playing Pac-Man but with one hand tied behind your back.
Penguin Wars seems like a cute game until you realize it makes no sense. You have to throw balls at an opposing penguin, but the physics are so bad that you end up hating every second of it. Double Dragon on Game Boy? Well, it's an ambitious attempt to bring an arcade classic to a portable console, but with a few bumps along the way. The controls aren't exactly the most responsive, often making you feel like you're fighting the game itself, rather than the enemies. The graphics are a little rough, with characters that sometimes seem a little confused between the pixels, but after all we are talking about a Game Boy port, so some compromises were inevitable. Despite everything, the charm of the original game still manages to shine through, especially if you're a fan of the series. If you were expecting a masterpiece from the Turtles, well, this is not the game you are looking for. Generic platforming, dumb enemies, and no real challenge. It's like they took everything that makes a Turtles game cool and flushed it down the toilet.
A game so old that it seems like it came straight from the Neolithic era of video games. The graphics are terrible, the gameplay is painfully slow, and the mechanics are so obscure that you wonder who on earth thought this was fun. A complete disaster. Boxing on Game Boy is like watching two robots punch each other, but in slow motion. The punches have no impact, and the controls are slower than old age. Makes you want to throw the Game Boy against the wall.
A skateboarding platformer that looks cool until you actually play it. The controls are so slippery that you spend more time falling than making cool moves. It's like I'm trying to skate on soap. The levels are designed by some sadist who loves to crash you every 2 seconds. Avoid it, guys, if you want to keep your sanity. Hell Wrestling? A nightmare for every wrestling fan. The controls are so tight that you feel like one of the slowest wrestlers in the world. And the moves? Forget about them. The only thing you'll be doing here is pushing buttons like a madman, hoping something will happen, but nothing good ever happens.
Lunar Lander is like trying to park a car in a narrow alley in space. Ultra-sensitive controls, and every little mistake sends you crashing into the lunar surface. It's a game of precision, but with a dose of frustration that makes you want to give up everything. There you have it, folks. A roundup of Game Boy games ranging from meh to why the hell does this crap exist? These titles will entertain you, piss you off, and sometimes leave you completely speechless. Leave a comment below on which game made you want to throw the Game Boy out the window the most, and don't forget to subscribe for more pissed off reviews.